Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Dave Frank. We are here to talk the news of the day. It is kind of, well, you would think it would be a slow week for Thanksgiving, but there actually is a lot of political stuff happening. A lot of it happened last week. A couple of things happened all at once, but we will talk about finally the House passing Build Back Better. We will see what happens to it in the Senate, but this is, of course, the package that was originally going to be 6 trillion, got whittled down to 3.5 trillion, then down to 2 trillion, and now it looks like if it does pass, it'll be 1.7 trillion. If it passes, it still is iffy with Senate mention in the Senate. But there are indications that Senate mention is kind of weakening in its opposition, but it did pass with family leave and a couple of the other things, and with the power of Medicare to negotiate at least some of the drug prices. We're not. I'm not exactly sure exactly what is in there, but in terms of that, but it does look like it is going to be actually a very extensive bill. Possibly the biggest bill still since the New Deal in terms of a lot of social services, pre-K, universal pre-K, and still very extensive climate-oriented bills. Still some, tax breaks for electric cars and a lot of infrastructure around that. At least for a few years, the tax credit, a number of really good progressive items in there. And still universal opposition from Republicans, even though there are programs in there that some Republicans have stated there aren't going to be any breaks from there. It really just, and moderates did go for it. They're waiting for the CBO break. It turns out that there is still, a couple $100 billion deficit there. But if you take into account the increased IRS enforcement and a few other things, the deficit impact is not that great, especially since it's spread out over 5 to 10 years. The deficit impact is not as bad as the infrastructure bill, definitely not as bad as a routine military budget bill or anything else. So it's kind of hypocritical anyway. The inflationary effect, 17 economists, famous economists, award-winning economists have actually argued that it has a net inflation positive effect for a number of reasons, and Manchin is actually softened on that. Oh, really? Can you tell me about that? And in any case, it's spread out over years, anyways, such that inflation is actually being seen as a canard. It looks like it's got a lot of momentum. Senator Schumer and other senators are saying that it probably will pass. Manchin and Sinema are not really saying that they're going to block it. They're not saying that they're going to support it, but it does seem to indicate that it may pass by the end of the year. Some of the thunder was stolen because it came out as the same day as the Rittenhouse verdict, so it kind of got moved to the second in terms of the headline, but it did still grab some attention. Democrats had a big celebration of it in the House, and they are upbeat and they are celebrating it and are getting ready to really push this as a success. Dave.
Yeah, so that was a great intro, setting up the stage here. I would say how you see it depends on where you stand or where you sit. What's that cliche? Where you stand depends on where you sit. Mm-hmm. Certainly, it's a success, and the White House and the Democrats are going to do what they can do to walk around, do the tour of the country and introduce it and point out the ways that it's going to improve people's lives, because it will legitimately and tangibly improve people's lives. So big picture, it's a success so far to get it through the House. your insights, I think, are accurate that it still needs to work through the Senate. There's still going to be some back and forth, but it does seem like it's something that will need to pass, in part because I think they're going to need to extend the deficit ceiling. So because the government's going to run out of money or sometime before Christmas, so there is an incentive to not have a government shutdown around Christmas, for Manchin and Sinema to kind of be team players in terms of kind of laundering that policy change in the budget reconciliation bill. Which, after all, let's remember, it is a budget reconciliation bill. They are going to have to reconcile the budget. So it's that's again big picture. A few of the things you pointed out, I would say, kind of point to some data points, some observations about it. First of all, you compared it to the the defense budget. So it is about a quarter, not even about of the annualized spending of what we already spend on the defense, overall defense budget, which is $780 billion a year. This is closer to what 170 billion a year. So it's smaller ball than people kind of led on. If you listen to what you hear on some media sources, this is it's socialism personified, and it's going to destroy the budget, and it's going to destroy the economy and inflation, all these other hyperbole. Not accurate. Like you said, economists have different opinions, but they all think it's relatively benign on that front. But there's a couple things that I think are also, and I'll try to keep it brief rather. A couple things that really highlight what the context, what the conversation was about. Let's remember, it was originally Democrats proposed maybe a $6 trillion plan. They pared it back in half to about $3 trillion. You and I talked about this in the spring, and I said, well, everybody should buy in if they could claim a win, if they can cut it down by about a third or so, which is close to what ended up happening apparently. But again, it's not finalized. So there's a lot of wins to be had. One, for example, is like that child tax credit, which was, Mitt Romney supports. It's a Republican supported family plan. So that's in there. There's a lot for people to like with respect to some of these other, social supports. So that's one element of this that's worth noting. Another element that's worth noting is that the largest single budget line item is the $300 billion or so that goes to the SALT tax, which is which was the red line for moderate Democrats to decrease the federal tax liability for people that are making above $400,000 or $800,000. They've got $1 million+ houses on the coasts and in other high rent zip codes. So that was the biggest priority for the moderate establishment Democrats, and they made sure to get that, which again, everything else has been pared back or cut back, so much so that this is the single biggest issue. And then finally, one last thing that I think is worth mentioning here too is that we do know that the Republicans are saying, professing that this is they a lot of budget gimmicks and a lot of timeline gimmicks to shorten the lifespan of some of these programs when you're budgeting out for 10 years, but then you say, well, actually, let's just fund this for 3 or 4 or 5. So they have somebody who's out there saying, some economists and some, I don't know if economist is the right word, some spokespeople of the Republican opposition to this are out there saying that, in fact, if you fully funded everything in the bill for the duration of 10 years, it's 5 to 6 trillion. So there's going to be things to fight about and argue about just in terms of the overall cost over time.
Right. And what the Republicans are worried about is what happened with Obamacare. I mean, they passed 50 resolutions to repeal Obamacare, right? And then when they finally had in 2016 the full power to repeal it, nothing. They didn't do it because it was vested, and they didn't want to do that. That would have created chaos. People would have been mad at them. And so if the child tax credit becomes vested and people are used to it, I think if it goes a few more years, I don't think anybody's going to want to cancel that. And so that what they're worried about is it's going to become vested, and they're going to say, well, it becomes a full thing. So if these programs become popular and are effective, they become vested, and so that's what they're kind of trying to say, and that's what Democrats are hoping. And if the programs aren't working and don't become popular, well, then that's fine. Then they don't work and they're not popular. So then you go and work on something else. We've talked about that in the past. So we'll kind of see, and maybe that's better anyways if they don't go very far. But we'll see.
Their decision to attack Ahmaud Arbery in their driveways because he was a black man running down the street.
Could have a gun, and he definitely has fists.
I shot him.
Why?
He had my gun. This is a life or death situation.
So proud of the jury and the jury system because it gave Kyle Rittenhouse a chance that all these other talking heads on television didn't give him. They had him convicted a long time ago.
This guy was a violent criminal, and the U.S. Marshals killed him. And I will tell you something, that's the way it has to be. There has to be retribution when you have crime like this.
The other big news Thursday night was the Rittenhouse verdict. They were out 4 days, and actually it was Friday morning. Was it Thursday night that they came out? It was Friday. Anyway, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. It was last week. Big, huge news. A polarizing case separating, the United States, completely different perceptions of what happened. And, of course, this was a young man who was dropped off by his mother, went to, with a very difficult situation with a big gun. A lot of different interpretations about what he did, what he intended to do, based on videos and things that he'd had put out, or we learned about him ahead of time. Two men ended up dead, one very seriously injured, and a contentious murder trial. And the jury was out for 4 days. I have to say that I thought the judge was insane. I really thought that some of the rulings were done. His temperament was way out of line. In terms of the way he handled it, his rantings about the media were way out of line, and he shouldn't have been paying attention to the media anyways. You don't care what the media says about you. You just do your job with the case. But I have to say the jury, with what they did, took it very seriously. They watched the video for 45 minutes, and they came away with reasonable doubt as to whether or not he committed murder or acted in what he felt was self-defense under the circumstances. And I have to say that there was a lot of confusion. I watched the videos. There's a lot of confusion happening, and of course, what happened was there's a very confusing incident as to who's lunging first or who's pointing what first, where one person is killed and shot, and then there is a situation in which he's under pursuit between two other individuals, one of who's armed with a gun, the other who's armed with a skateboard, who attacks him with it, and the person with the skateboard is killed, and the person with the gun is very badly injured, and the interpretation from one side of the country is that those two people were heroically trying to subdue, capture an active shooter. And from the other side of the country is these two people were trying to kill him, and he, defended himself. And, it's very possible that what the jury decided, or what people was he thought they were trying to kill him, and they thought they were trying to subdue an active killer. It could be that both were true. Both perceptions were true, right? And that's just a very sad situation. And anyway, he was acquitted. Because they of what happened, and obviously there's a lot of fear out there. There's a lot of the right wing and gun culture feels very vindicated. They feel that this is This is this, and they're crowing all over social media. You hear a lot of black activist groups saying we're going to have to hire armed security for our demonstrations from here on in. A lot of fear, and discussion saying if this can happen to white people and the person get off, we feel even less safe. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about this. And then some very interesting interview, and you can talk about it a little bit, which shows that this young man. I don't know if he's being told to say these things, but it's showing maybe there's a little nuance, or maybe he's a little confused. I mean, this young man was raised in cop culture. Was he going hunting, or maybe he really did think it was appropriate to go with a big gun and help defend property? I don't know, but it does, it is very possible that he did go to defend property, found himself in a situation, felt he was defending himself, that the two, Huber, and I'm forgetting the name of the other guy who did have a gun. He probably shouldn't have had a gun at a demonstration either, but did have a gun, that they were heroically and foolishly trying to subdue what they thought was an active gunner. He felt like he was acting in self-defense. Anyway, Dave?
Yeah, so this is a obviously there's a lot of complexity involved, and we're not going to get to the bottom of things. But what are some of the headline or highlights of sort of where we are now, looking back at the verdict from last week, and then sort of projecting out into the future? So one of the things that you highlighted, I would say, is that the judge. So in speaking with colleagues and listening to other media personalities, you hear that he appeared to have sort of treated Kyle Rittenhouse almost like a client in the way he managed the case. So that left a bad taste in people's mouth. If you look at there was a Bill Maher episode on Friday and a Saturday Night Live episode on Saturday, so the popular culture has kind of embraced this to maybe make somewhat light out of the hypocrisy, some of the elements of hypocrisy that it seemed to reveal, and also some of the schisms in society. So, for example, we've both seen the videos of the event. We've both seen the interview on Fox that he did with Tucker Carlson. So there's just a lot of nuance. But I think one of the big takeaways is that the court of law, the case itself, is about some highly, ritualized, compartmentalized, specific institutional questions. Yeah. And so when someone is, running away from assaulters and the assaulters catch that person and the person is backed into the wall, common law says when you're backed into a corner, you can defend yourself. Is that what happened? And I think, the prosecution, apparently did not make the case that this person was murdering someone. Instead, the prosecution apparently, from the jury's perspective, made the case that this person was actually just backed into a corner and had to defend themselves with their common law right. So that's kind of where we stand. So now the question is, like, how are people perceiving this going into it, and how are people perceiving this going out of it? There was so much misunderstanding and lack of understanding of what happened. For example, most of the people I talked to said, and this shouldn't be a key issue, but it kind of is in conversations I've had. No one even knew that the victims were white, just based on a lot of the hyperbole about, was it a Black Lives Matter protest, and was it an active shooter out there to cause intrigue? All these things aren't knowable, really. But one thing we should know is that that the media kind of got caught up in the sensationalism going into it, and afterwards also there's sensationalism on both ends. Yeah. So I think it does kind of point out the responsibility of us as citizens not to get so sucked in unless we're going to devote the time to learn and understand a little bit better. Yeah.
Well, I just want to point out in his interview, and who knows if he's being told what to say so that he can come across as nuanced, but he says he supports the Black Lives Matter movement, and he made a really interesting comment, whether it was in earnest or not. He said, what if I was black or a person of color? He said, I as white, had more resources, but if I was in the same position as a person of color, I might not have gotten this result. I mean, that's a real interesting, profound thing for him to say. And it's
a 17-year-old, by the way, right? I mean, he's 17 years old.
Yeah, well, I think he's 18 now, but yeah, right. I mean, really interesting for something that is everybody or a lot of people are trying to pose as a white supremacist. I mean, and by the way, he really made angry a lot of his supporters, his right-wing supporters, by saying that. So it's just kind of an interesting nuance in this thing that he just kind of threw into it. Maybe a lot of us have misjudged this kid. I don't know, and it's just, more to come. We'll see what happens and how this develops.
I just have a final thought. I know we're getting near the end of this segment, but he's been, promoted or projected or elevated as a hero to the right in many ways. Matt Gaetz and some others have offered him a job. Tucker Carlson is doing a full documentary about it just to release around the holidays so that everybody can get some access to right-wing media, sensationalism. So I don't think this is over. I don't think it's going to end. And to be honest, folks on the left I talk to are saying, oh, great, now it's open season on any kind of protest, any kind of progressives, any kind of left speaking or left-leaning folks are going to be potential victims. So I think that's all a little bit too heavy of a summary. I think it's the truth is somewhere south of that. It's not all that it's cracked up to be.
Of course, Matt Gaetz is into teenagers, right? But anyway, never mind. Next segment. All right. Next topic is a little bit of a blend of things. We talked about inflation a lot last week. Gas prices have eased off a little bit. Of course, it's winter. But, we're talking about, there's all kinds of course, ongoing media discussion about how prices are what might bring Biden and the Democrats down. And despite the fact that we have a great jobs report, and it turns out that we've got this really strange thing that happened, that the jobs report of the summer that were dramatically underreported, like the most underreported since the 1970s for some reason. Maybe it had something to do with the pandemic, that for some reason things were reported late. I don't know, but for some reason we have an economy that is improving faster than we thought, and yet that just isn't somehow getting out of there. So Biden is looking for good headlines, looking for ways to do things. So he is doing something that a lot of people object to, even some Democrats, and he wants to at least get in the news of trying to do something to curb prices. And he is tapping in to the National Reserve of Oil. A lot of people say that doesn't really do anything to lower gas prices, and there isn't a lot you can do, a president can do about inflation or prices. But I think the idea is he wants to be perceived as doing something to do it. Will it lower prices? We don't know. Nobody knows. I mean, it's just really hard to say. It does put more oil and thus gas into the market, so maybe it will, or at least temporarily, or maybe he feels like because in the winter and because there's a little bit of resurgence of pandemic and other factors, that gas prices will go down a little bit anyway, and so he does this, and so it looks like cause and effect. He can collect a little bit of credit for it no matter what. I don't know what the game is, but at least he wants to look like he's doing something so he can say, see, I did that, prices went down. I don't know. He's looking for something, but at least he wants to make it look like he's doing something active. Walmart also came out today, the executive, forget his name, guy looks like John Savage. He came out and he's credited, said, hey, we're filling up our shelves thanks to what Joe Biden has done. A lot of the stuff that's happened at the LA port and the rest, some of the log jams have been clear. The 24/7 stuff is working. We are actually getting some stuff done that could put some ease on prices as supplies are happening on all the stuff. So they're looking for good news, and so he's looking to at least give the perception that he's doing something as we're going into Thanksgiving. Dave, what do you got to say on that?
Yeah, so when we talk about inflation, I know we've done this a few times. We sometimes we get super into the weeds on the technicalities, but I think this is a good time to just kind of look at it more from the surface level. This week, the president and the White House made an announcement. They'd been working with our allies. I think there's a set of about 6 or 8 countries who have all agreed to release some of their own strategic reserves, like South Korea, Japan, and some others, but also China too. So China has also said they're going to work with us to try to take some of the pressure off the increase in oil prices. So that's a key element of why I think the president is looking to get some credit. One is people were freaking out about inflation, even though it's the Federal Reserve and others say it's transitory, which means it's a anomaly based on the fact that we've had a 18-month pandemic or more now at this point. So the global crisis of having a pandemic and shutdowns and restrictions, et cetera, it caused a general slowdown, which resulted in a cutback from OPEC, which is the global oil cartel. And so when they cut down their production to match the slowdown in the economy, they have a benefit to delay how quickly they ramp it back up. So there's this kind of mismatch between the expanding economy and the release of new oil from production. So speculators jump in and say, oh, look, we have inflation, we've got limited supply, we've got increasing demand, let's speculate. So then they buy futures prices and they bid it up. So the president needed to do something, met with allies, decided to do this token and I think gesture. I don't know if token gesture. It's a concrete gesture. I think the Japanese foreign minister had said it's about 5%. Like that's what the people have agreed to. 5% of the total reserves as a way to sort of insulate people during the holidays from this main impact. And as a reminder, energy inputs go into transportation like shipping and trains and trucks, right, where all the goods go. So and many products are energy intensive, or at least energy inputs, like even agriculture for fertilizers and tractors. So everything goes up when energy goes up. So it's kind of, hate to say it, but it's like this perfect storm, and it's a cliche, but that's where we are. And people, the Federal Reserve came out, I think, this morning and said, look, when we project 2020 to 2023, energy will not be a significant impact on inflation over that period. So they're talking down inflation, they're talking down the impact of energy. So it's this concerted effort, I think, to make us feel like, look, our leaders have their eye on the ball.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's the whole idea. Is they want the perception. You want to look like you're doing something. There's always the people who say you don't want to touch the reserves. You want to save it for an emergency. But when do we ever use it? Right? I mean, we've had these reserves for now like 50 years or whatever it is, and whoa, we got to save it for an emergency. It's like, what, we haven't used it. I mean, it's rare that we ever have to actually use it for that. Why not use a little bit of it here and there? I mean, for when if 6% inflation, and having it go up, and to use just a little bit of it to ease that up for a little bit, why not? That's what it's there for. As far as I'm concerned, what constitutes an emergency? Come up with a policy for what constitutes that. Have different levels of emergency for how much we use it for different things. But there's been this perception too that, well, Biden blew it because he's talking all this green and going green and climate change stuff. So Russia and Saudi Arabia are punishing him for it. Now he's going and begging because he's closing the pipelines and stuff like that. I don't believe that. Because and other people don't believe that either, because if you do that, the more you do that and cut stuff off, then people and other industries start looking for alternatives, and they set up those alternatives, and then you start going back to the oil again. They don't leave those alternatives, and you've lost those markets for good. They're if anything, they don't want to lose that, and they're going to gradually lose that anyway. So they don't want to mess with that. They're cutting back because they had to, and gradually those markets are going to change too. They know it. They know it's going to happen, so they want to transition with it as much as possible. I think that fossil fuel and oil companies know that eventually they're not going to have the monopoly they have. So they want to gradually move on it. They might as well not get mad about it, because no matter how much they have Manchin out there trying to slow it all down, it is going to change. Hopefully, in time to save the planet. But it is going to change. So.
We've talked about some macroeconomic issues, and to a lesser extent some micro, things that are happening domestically with choices and political messaging. But there is you referenced Putin in Russia and Saudi Arabia. So I think it's worth at least mentioning that there are people out there that are experts in the field. It's not like it's empty bluster, that are saying, look, in the strategic game, the great game, where the West. Western European countries in the United States, England, Australia, Japan, South Korea, we're all allies, quote unquote, against, these other countries. And in terms of defining the liberal economic world order, and so Russia does, Putin at the personal level does have an axe to grind with Joe Biden and
Sure.
the United States' position, and similarly, right. Saudi Arabia also does have an axe to grind as the United States threatens to cut off weapons because of the war in Yemen, and hold the leader accountable because of murdering the Washington Post journalist Khashoggi. So there are sort of personal issues going on, and people have said that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has said, hey, if Joe Biden wants to collaborate on the price of oil, he knows who to call.
But they're not going to jeopardize permanent markets over short-term political issues, I don't think.
We are living in a society where the very, very rich are getting phenomenally richer. Meanwhile, the working class of this country is struggling. You got 600,000 people who are homeless. You got parents who cannot afford childcare.
The game is to shrink the cost, start a whole lot of programs, and claim, look, this is just one more round of the kind of inflationary policies that they enacted earlier this year on a party line basis. They dumped almost $2 trillion on the economy, sent inflation through the roof, and they're not through. They want to keep on doing it with higher taxes and entitlement programs.
So I'm here today to talk about what's fundamentally at stake right now for the families and for our country. For most of the 20th century, we led the world by a significant margin because we invested in our people. We invested in ourselves, not only in our roads and our highways and our bridges, but on our people.
Okay. Redistricting. We've got a lot of redistricting news coming up, and we have talked about how the Republicans haven't been able to gerrymander a whole lot in their favor so far, but we're coming to some points where they are actually able to, pending the lawsuits granted. And we're going to start with North Carolina. North Carolina, it does look like they are going to be able to, again, pending the lawsuits, expand their base. And if you take a look at the old map and the new map as they propose, they definitely expand to add at least a couple, to knock off a couple of Democratic maps here. And what they did last time is, if you'll notice in the new map, they completely shut down Greensboro. There is a Democratic district on the old map up on Greensboro, and they eliminate that one. What they tried to do 10 years ago was split up that blue district down by Charlotte. Well, there are more black voters down by Charlotte than there are in Greensboro. What they're hoping is they won't get into trouble in Greensboro because there aren't as many black voters, so maybe they won't get into trouble with the Voting Rights Act there because they aren't splitting up a black community as much. They still probably will get into trouble with it, but that's what they're trying to do. And they also turn one of the districts outside Raleigh into one that's much more competitive, hoping that maybe they can take out Butterfield. He's already resigned and because of that, he is retiring, and gave a speech that he's very upset with it. Democrats are upset because they could very well lose that seat up in North Carolina. Second, you see that big gray area on the new map, and it was the light blue map before. Anyway, North Carolina, the Republicans look to possibly pick up 2 districts. Dave?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that last comment, that the big takeaway here is that the Democrats went from 4 solid, 1 leaning to 3 solid, 1 toss up. So it combined with the fact that the state picks up another district, that leaves them with a net -1 plus, almost -2. So yeah, that was ineffective from the perspective of Republican gerrymandering. It was effective, and the governor, I don't believe, has to sign this in the state, so it's locked in, like you said, pending a lawsuit. And then the question is it what was there? Will the NCAA's pending case or active case end up with any kind of results? And we have no idea how that'll turn out in federal court.
Yeah. Now, bear in mind, the Voting Rights Act was gutted, but splitting up communities of color is the one aspect of the Voting Rights Act that even the conservative majority Supreme Court has left intact. And this is a Supreme Court lately that's been very defensive about not wanting to be partisan. So they may actually react to this, and they did previously overturn the previous map when they tried to split up the Charlotte district. So we'll see what they do here. But it is, and Butterfield gave a very impassioned, speech about how this was just disgusting politics. So we will see what happens. But it is not looking good. And bear in mind, this is a state where which is about split evenly between Republicans and Democrats. And look at the spread there. Where it's really basically, however many, I'm not sure exactly how many Republicans, but
10 Republican leaning seats, 3 Democrat and 1 competitive. So
one competitive. So
yeah.
This is definitely, gerrymandering at its particularly worst.
Yes.
But we've seen that. So North Carolina, definitely an example there, and possibly 2 basic pickups for the Republicans. So we'll go from there. Now let's take a look at Ohio. They are being really aggressive in Ohio. Take a look at the old map, which was really bad to begin with. Now, I know you listening on the radio, you can't see it. I forgot to mention this is at the 538 site. If you go to Google and look up 538, you can see this later. But the Ohio maps are basically again, Ohio is a pretty Republican state these days, but not this Republican. It is very red. You've got a pretty blue area up in Cleveland and Columbus, and Cincinnati ought to be blue, but but they have pretty much split Cincinnati in half, basically in the old map and the new map. In the new map, Cincinnati is actually competitive in the new map, but they have pretty much confined Columbus to a blue area. Cleveland is Chantel Brown's district, but they've really crammed her in. She's got a partisan lean of 55 points, so they've basically crammed her in. And there is a competitive district by Republican Anthony Gonzalez. Possibly could take him out, but they have also pretty much eliminated the Marcy Captors, was in what they refer to as the snake by the lake. She was in a Democratic lean of 16 points. They've pretty much eliminated her, district and put her into what would be a Republican lean of about 8 points. Be very hard for her to win re-election. Not impossible, as the Godfather line goes, difficult but not impossible. But they are aggressively trying to take her out, and they are attempting to basically pick up several seats. They are losing a seat. Ohio is one of those states that is losing a seat because of the decline in population, or at least the relative decline relative to other population growths. And you'll see that that the Duck district, the Ohio's fourth, of Jim Jordan won't look quite as ridiculous. It does look better, but they are beefing him up so that he is a R38. Well, no, it's about the same actually, but it doesn't look quite as ridiculous. I think they're just pulling him back from the lake and having him cover some other areas. And it looks like they've got Michael Turner right around Dayton. It's a lean. Maybe he might have a little bit of a hard time winning re-election, but not too hard. We'll see. If Democrats get a real good candidate, he could possibly be defeated, but they are going aggressive here. Dave?
So in Ohio, one thing that I thought was notable was that they did pass some, redistricting reform in their state. With the attempt, in theory, to try to moderate the redistricting process, but that's not what happened. It's a heavily Republican-controlled state, and they were able to advance their cause of solidifying support a little bit more, while even losing a district, like you said. So as it stands now, it could be the case, just based on how it is, with two Democratic-leaning seats and two up for grab seats, but they're very, very closely matched. One Cincinnati area there, and so their nearest city, it's potential to be Democratic, but it's not impossible for this to be a 13-2 state, and that would be a net loss if that actually ends up happening. I think it's interesting to see how they're able to just incrementally increase the states that were the districts that were solid. So they kind of while it's not quite as egregious, I guess, as it could be, it's still a little bit of a tightening around equality.
All right. One thing the Democrats are planning to do, if this map survives, and I don't know if there's going to be legal challenges to the map, I haven't heard one way or another, is in Cincinnati, the Democrats are going to aggressively challenge Steve Chabot. They have made that district. They are kind of gambling a little bit, the Republicans, with this, if this is going to be the final map. It is not the final map, by the way, but if they do go with this, they've made it a bit more competitive for Steve Chabot. They're gambling a little bit, and the Democrats intend to go at him hard on this. He's popular. And would be difficult to beat, but because he's not all that right wing, he's actually kind of moderate. But they will go at him hard.
So, Eric, there's one last thing here before we move on to the next state. A former Attorney General Eric Holder, his campaign, that interests him the most these days is voting rights, and so his group, his organization has filed a lawsuit. So,
okay,
to be determined.
That's good to know. And they pretty much gerrymandered Tim Murphy out, but that's okay because he's running for the Senate anyway. So, we'll see if he has any luck there, but it's a tough, place to win. I mean, there is a Democratic senator, as we all know, but he's just somehow managed to survive it. Well, anyway, more news there, but Ohio is definitely, where they have had some success in expanding the Republicans and probably will, unless there's a big unless Democrats learn how to talk to working class people again. All right. The next map to look at, Alabama, no change here. This is pretty much the same map. You look at the old map, it's the same octopus. But, what's ridiculous is you look at the elections, and Democrats are pretty much 40% of the electorate there. There should be actually two Democrats. There's a total of 7 districts, and there ought to be at least 2 Democratic districts, one around Montgomery and one around Birmingham. But you see what they do is you've got in this Alabama 7th district. If for those of you who can see the map, they have one blue district basically that encompasses Birmingham, stretches out into the western rural areas, which are primarily black rural areas, and then stretches back over to the right again to encompass the good portion of Montgomery. That is to basically contain a good portion of the black population in Alabama. It shouldn't be allowed, but it's been allowed. Even in the old days of the Voting Rights Act, somehow it was allowed to happen, but it's to be contained. And back when, what was the name of the senator who had beaten Roy? God, I've forgotten his name already, but he got into the administration, but he was the Democrat who upset the Republican.
Upset Roy Blunt down there.
Yeah, he beat Roy Blunt. Anyways, he'd won with just 50%.
Scott? Was his name Scott?
I can't remember, but he'd won with just under 50% of the vote. Even with that election, the way the Democrats voted, they would have only taken that one spot. This was gerrymandered. Again, Republicans can't pick up anymore. They've basically redistricted a little bit just to make sure, because there might have been some fluctuations. The black vote, got to contain that black vote, and that's what they do in the South, and they're going to continue to do that.
Yeah, each of those districts that are red, that are Republican, are plus 32 or more.
Yeah.
And they're able to fit 25% of the population into 1/7 of the delegation.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Anyway, but there should be 2 Democratic districts there. There aren't. Looking at Nevada, you compare it to the old map, it's kind of interesting. The old map shows basically Las Vegas being blue. You see it's very small. And then 2 very competitive districts, but all held by Democrats, even though they're Republican leaning. We won't go into why it's considered Republican leaning. It's 538's analysis. I don't agree with 538's analysis as they apply to these counties. I actually think they should be Democratic leaning, but because I don't think they apply to Nevada, maybe Arizona and other states. And you've got that northern one that's heavily Republican. These states will all these districts will all go to Republicans, but you see that Democrats. Sorry about that. And it will remain that way. But it looks that you can see how it's been redone. It benefits Democrats. I don't know how this one, who does this, if it's independent or not. I've been trying to see that, I was looking at it, but I know that Latinos are unhappy with this because it's not really empowering them. Even though Democrats will maintain a hold, but it's kind of an interesting dynamic there, because the Democrats will maintain an advantage in Nevada, but there's a little bit of a different politics there, because Latinos were hoping to have more power within the structure.
This was a Democrat proposed map, and they solidified the Republican. It's a more dense, more leaning Republican district, a more dense, more leaning Democratic district in the extremes, and then the 2 competitive districts around Las Vegas, where I suspect they think that electioneering could sway in their favor, particularly with all those folks in Vegas who work in the the casinos and the unions and such. So maybe they figured those competitive districts they could out-organize down there, but it appears to be incremental change from the past.
Yeah, no big change here. Nevada is becoming more blue. Will probably continue to become blue as more Californians move there and more Latinos move into the state. But interesting politics around that. Only so much gerrymandering anybody can do there. The northern part will probably stay Republican for quite a while until more people move into Reno. All right, last state I want to take a look at. No, there's nothing that can be done here for Republicans. There's no way it could be gerrymandered to even make one Republican state. I've actually looked at it. I mean, you've got D plus 22. I think the lowest one is D plus 22. You get into one of the western states. I don't think Republicans are complaining about it all. This is Massachusetts. Sorry. It is blue, blue, blue all the way through. It's like looking at Arkansas or any of the states for the red. It's blue solid through, no question about it. There's no way you could slice it to come up with a red district. So there is no controversy about it, and they have apparently, though, sliced it up to create, I think, some black leaning districts. I don't know if they've worked towards any Latino districts. I haven't heard towards that, but they have gotten a couple of, at least one district around Boston to empower some communities of color, and apparently not a lot of complaints. So it looks like this is going to happen without a whole lot of fuss. But this is it's been blue for a long time. Even though they elect Republican governors a lot. And sometimes Republican senators. Very interesting state, probably one of the bluest states in the union, and yet they sometimes elect people like Romney.
Yeah, and interestingly, it was a state that proposed Obamacare under a Republican governor back in the day. So somewhat, old school, maybe not fully progressive or fully liberal, but certainly out of the box of how we typically define Republicans from New England. So there's one comment I'll make on this one, which is that since they're all districts are Democrat, the question is, well, who's going to get which part of the party? So this is an intra-party fight. The equivalent of the Secretary of State, which in Massachusetts is known as the Secretary of Commonwealth, he criticized the map because there are communities that were divided. And so it's an inter-democratic fight over gerrymandering for power within the party. There's those conversations happening.
All right. Well, there is. I will say that, you're a bit young to remember it, but I was pretty young too. But McGovern took only one state, and that was Massachusetts against Nixon. And there was a bumper sticker that I remember seeing said, "Don't blame me. I'm from Massachusetts." So Massachusetts does have a legacy. Later on, with Reagan, it was "Don't blame me. I'm from Minnesota." But anyway, anyway, there'll be more to come. There are some more states, and some of these that we've reported on may not be finalized because there are lawsuits, but this is going on. Even with the states we've seen today, though, I'm not seeing an earth-sea shift due to gerrymandering. And because there are some states in which Democrats are gerrymandering, whereas in the past Democrats have abstained from that. So more to come. We'll talk about that in the future. All right, this brings us to our predictions. Dave, what do you got?
Well, mine's going to be a very short story and a very speculative prediction. So this week, a federal judge in Colorado ordered two pro-Trump lawyers to pay almost $200,000 in attorney fees to the defendants in their suits, in those lawsuits. So like Dominion Voting and Facebook, for example, Trump's lawyers have to pay them back, basically in effect, for frivolous lawsuits. So the judge, his name is N. Reed Neuriter. He said that, and this is why I think it's important. He said that they filed wasteful, extraordinarily overbroad and dangerous lawsuit, that they did not hire any election experts to back up their claims of fraud at all. So there was no expert that even challenged if there was fraud or addressed the issue of fraud in any way. The judge asserted the lawsuit was entirely used to, quote, manipulate gullible members of the public and foment public unrest, unquote. Another quote, he said, to that extent, the lawsuit has been an abuse of the legal system and an interference of the machinery of government, unquote. He said they are, quote, experienced lawyers who, quote, should have known better, and they, quote, need to take responsibility for misconduct. So he said they, quote, acted in bad faith by not doing any real research to bolster their arguments that the election had been rigged against Donald Trump. So I think this piece of evidence is a dot. It's a blip on the radar. People will be able to point to and hopefully have conversations about and say, let's point at that and have a conversation about that, because maybe we'll get some insights into the status of elections being in jeopardy and being questioned. And hopefully my prediction is that maybe there will be people who will have a thoughtful conversation in public about what the headline says is wasting time and money on the big lie.
All right. Well, I've got a kind of a similar prediction about Trump. Parnell had to drop out of his race. He was a Senate candidate backed by Trump in Pennsylvania because there were allegations against him for physical abuse against his wife. He was backed in the Republican primary. He had to drop out because he lost his custody battle over those allegations. The judge apparently believed her. Trump has lost some face over that, and it's being perceived that he is starting to lose his influence. But this with Christie, former Governor Christie, saying that people need to look behind and not be considering Trump. I think there's going to be more pushback, and I think you're going to start to see candidates bucking Trump more, because they think the Republicans are going to say that after the Youngkin win that they cannot retake Congress if Trump is running the show, and they're going to push back on the big lie. And I think Trump is going to push back on that. And I think you're going to start to see a real fight that the Republicans are going to want to resolve before the campaign for 2022 starts in earnest. And you're going to see a lot of fights happen over the next couple of months so that they have it resolved before the spring. And that's sort of a vague prediction, but I think you're going to see it. All right, well, that covers this show. Until next time, keep thinking and enjoy the harvest holiday.